So Botswana's appeals court has unanimously ruled that same-sex activities are protected under the country's constitution. That ruling has been lauded as a sign of changing attitudes in the conservative country and a lesson to other countries within the African region. However, homosexuality remains a crime in a number of states within the region, including Malawi, Zimbabwe and Mozambique. Chesterfield Samba has been a queer activist for some 10 years in Zimbabwe. He joins us now live from the capital city there, Harare, for reaction to this. And Chesterfield, it's great to have you on the program. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us. So years ago, when South Africa essentially also decriminalized gay sex, there was this feeling that it's a seminal moment in not only South Africa's history, but also in the region. Years later, it feels like that ripple effect that was hoped at the time hasn't taken place. With this judgment in Botswana, do you think we're finally at that stage?
I think we're getting there as a continent looking at what's also happening in Africa. There's growing tolerance in some parts of Africa. There are changes that we're experiencing as LGBTI activists, particularly in the countries that were largely viewed as very conservative and also to some extent homophobic. So we do see that wave of change happening across continents where the policy bearers are starting to engage with LGBTI activists in country, and activists also have been emboldened to challenge unfair and unjust laws through litigation, through awareness raising, and through other various means where they are also speaking out in terms of asserting their rights as citizens.
Hard not to see this ruling in the context of what took place in the country you're in now, with Somizi Mhlongo, who's from South Africa. I mean, I'm sure it's a story you might have followed as well. Somizi essentially being barred from entering into Zimbabwe by some interest groups on no other basis outside of his sexual orientation. I mean, how do we read what's taking place within our judiciaries versus the attitude still in the pews, so to speak?
So we do see that there is that disconnect between what's happening in the judiciary and what's happening on the ground. And if you mirror that with the South African perspective, so to speak, we saw that there were changes in the laws. But what happens on the ground in terms of the lived realities of LGBTI individuals in South Africa is really painful and distressful. We find that communities are still experiencing violence. A lot of violence is reported in South Africa. A lot of murders also still happen in South Africa with regards to lesbian women. So there is that need where communities are also brought to these conversations. And this is something that we are also experiencing in Zimbabwe, where we find that although our judiciary is conservative, but communities are also opening up. So there is the need to create awareness in communities and move with communities in this conversation.
Yeah. For better or for worse, it almost feels like it's the politics of the day that dictate quite literally whether certain individuals in some countries get to live their full lives, so to speak. I mean, how do we reconcile that? I mean, for instance, in Botswana, a lot of the commentary has been that this ruling has been enabled by the fact that there's been a change in the political leadership in that country. A tough pill to swallow in other countries where it doesn't appear that that kind of change is imminent.
Precisely. The politics of the day does have a role to play in the extent to which LGBTI people get to enjoy and fulfill their rights as citizens in any particular country. I recall some time in Botswana where we were having a conversation with former president in Botswana who was saying, I couldn't repeal the laws because I didn't want to lose an election. And you find that these issues continue to play out where LGBTI issues are politicized at the expense of the LGBTI individuals themselves. So the actual politicization then creates an environment where vigilantes then happen in countries where the politics of the day is a challenge. So Botswana, when you see that they now have a new president, this has happened. But in Zimbabwe, this is not the case because we still have a generation of leaders that were closely aligned to former President Robert Mugabe, who was very homophobic and didn't shy away from speaking out in terms of his hatred towards LGBTI individuals. But we do hope leaders coming in, a younger generation which is more tolerant and accepting of LGBTI individuals, not only LGBTI individuals, but diversity in general. Because that's also a challenge where communities do tend to find it very difficult to accept diversity in countries.
Yeah. You speak about Robert Mugabe. Who could ever forget those remarks he made? I think it was at the UN General Assembly in 2015. "We are not gays," is the direct quote. An exclamation that made headlines around the world, quite frankly. I mean, with that in mind, are you able to paint a picture for us about the experience mostly of gay people in a country like Zimbabwe, given a leader like that?
Yeah, so there was always that contradiction, particularly during his time. You would find that he was very vocal around his disdain for homosexual individuals, and he took that hatred internationally on global platforms. But let us also not forget that this was also a political issue for him, speaking about his survival as a leader, his term in office. He had overstayed his welcome in a country, but also had challenges with the global south around how he dealt with general human rights in a country like Zimbabwe. So there was really a lot of intersectionality of issues, but I think the LGBTI issues became fodder for him, where obviously when he spoke very well and articulately and passionately on the issue, much to the support of a number of African leaders who were also generally against homosexuality and against Western influence in terms of how then they viewed their seats, their positions in the political global arena.
Right. The irony, of course, is that a lot of these laws were rooted in colonial legislation, which had a hangover in Africa. And, with each country kind of decriminalizing gay sex, we kind of see how draconian even the logic was from the beginning. And now we're seeing, for instance, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa on this multilateral tour of West African nations. Do you still get a sense that issues like this make it onto the agenda of these kind of engagements?
It's always a political hot potato, but I think as activists, we're pushing to ensure that this issue remains also part of the broader agenda that our leaders are having. Because if we are talking about decolonizing Africa and really getting rid of all the effects of colonialism, surely then such laws as the sodomy laws have to go with everything that's colonial if we are really serious about our patriotism as Africans and ensuring that we get rid of all the remnants of colonialism, and so do the sodomy laws, which came with colonialism. I think as Africa, we make a very good case to say that these also have to go.
Chesterfield Samba, thanks very much indeed for your time and insights. Really do appreciate it. Chesterfield is an LGBT activist based in Zimbabwe. Once again, appreciate your insights.